It takes a lot to even consider becoming an expat, but it takes even more to make it happen. You have to research the locations that work for you, develop a plan, figure out the logistics of making it work, and then execute the actual plan so you can move. And it's easy to see the obstacles, with finances being a common one. How will I make money? Will I have enough to support myself and my family? What about my debt at home? And while you can certainly move overseas, even if you have debt, it's not necessarily the path that many people want to take. And that was a sticking point for Chinique Gordon and her husband. They were a young couple living in the United Kingdom who wanted to get more out of life, but they had financial debt that seemed to be a barrier to moving abroad. So they decided to go after it. After clearing over 20,000 pounds of debt in 2 years, in March of 2018, they quit their jobs and sold almost everything they owned to travel the world with their then 9-month-old. Since then, they've been on a lifelong freedom journey, living in 14 countries so far, challenging the myths and showing Black people that it's possible to live a purpose-filled life outside of the 9-to-5, even with young children. In this episode, Chinique discusses how travel as a teenager and young adult had an impact. She talks about the moments she and her husband decided it was time to leave and the strategies they used to get out of debt. She also drops some tips on how her family has built and maintained income throughout their various online businesses. If you're thinking about moving abroad and need some practical encouragement on how to get your finances in order before you go, this is the episode for you. Welcome to the Global Chatter. So let's get started. I want to kind of set the scene. And so tell me where you grew up. Where was home base for you as a child? Where did you spend your time as a youth?
So I was born and raised in London in the UK. Lived there my whole entire life up until almost 4 years ago.
Oh my goodness. And so tell me, just even from a family dynamic, right? Is your family originally from the UK? Did they immigrate from somewhere else? Like what's kind of the story there?
So my mum was born and raised in the UK as well. My dad was born in Jamaica, but came over to the UK as a teenager. So I do have Jamaican heritage. My mum's parents are Jamaican as well. So very much in tune with my Jamaican heritage, but with a London flair, because obviously that's where I grew up.
And I'm always interested in this question, obviously listening to me, American accent or whatever. And I think about sort of identity quite a bit as being first generation American. I'm curious, like growing up in the UK and having obviously a dad who was Jamaican and came over as a teenager, and your mom who's like second generation, really, I guess. Mm-hmm. Were you connected to the Jamaican communities in London? Were you around folks who had those identities? Was that part of your story or not so much?
Oh yeah, 100%. I would say more so from like my family side. So my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents on my dad's side, especially, were all in the UK. So in terms of family gatherings and, kind of the food we ate, it was very much influenced by our Jamaican culture. But then maybe like when I went to school, on the other hand, and I grew up in a predominantly white area. So no, in that sense, kind of in a lot of my social backgrounds, I danced a lot when I was younger, and that was majority white as well. So kind of had an experience from both sides.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, there's a term called cross-cultural kids, right? Which I think you are a perfect example of it, right? So cross-cultural kids are kids who there's a dominant culture, right? but then there is another culture, whether within their home or their community, however that's defined, where they're going in between the two. So I would imagine for you, it was very much like school was one thing.
Oh, yeah.
And then life was
exactly. No, exactly that. So I always feel like I had kind of different groups of friends, and they kind of all slotted in, you know, for different reasons. And, you know, maybe my accent might slightly change depending on the group of people that I was around at that particular kind of time.
Yeah. Wow. And so did you ever have a chance to go to Jamaica as a younger child when you were at home, or did your family not really go back there at all?
So as a child, I want to say as a teenager, I went back to Jamaica with my mum and my sister. We actually went for my mum's birthday, one of my mum's birthdays.
Oh, wow.
However, I would say that it was very much, we stayed at the resort. And we almost never left the resort apart from for a couple of day excursions, you know, like to Dunn's River and to the market and stuff. So I got a very shielded view of Jamaica. And that was kind of the first and only time that I went with my family. I did go a second time, and the second time I went with my then boyfriend, now husband. Yeah. And that was like the complete flip side. That was real Jamaica. We stayed with his family. And, you know, kind of, I feel like I experienced more of a local experience, and I loved both. I loved both experiences, to be honest. So I wouldn't necessarily say I preferred one or the other, but they were completely different for sure.
Oh my God. Let's deconstruct that for a moment. No, but seriously though, like, so that's absolutely fascinating. Like when you went with your mom and you guys obviously stayed at the resort, did you have any interactions with extended family at all, or no?
No, not at all, because the area that we were in was quite far away from where my family lives. So we used to have a family home in Kingston, Jamaica, and my grandparents on my dad's side, who are still alive, living in another town as well, which was quite far from where we are. We're talking like several hours. Yeah. So no, there was never, we didn't go for family. We didn't see any family. Oh, gotcha. At all. It was literally just
a vacation. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, I conflated the two, because normally it's like, oh, we've gone to the home country, and it's like, and we have to see like 50 million cousins. But this was, your mother just went to go relax.
Oh,
she
yeah.
Didn't even.
Yep.
That's actually kind of ballsy. She went to just go get some sun. I mean, there's family, but whatever. Wow. And so, I mean, but I'm still curious about this. So, because at that point, you've been born and raised in the UK, and you do go to Jamaica for the first time. What was sort of your experiences just even the first time going? Because I've had this conversation with people before, and I'll pick on my folks who grew up in the West, right? They grew up in Western countries, and then they get to go to a Black or brown country, especially if there's an ancestral tie there. And it's like this light, it's like this light kind of shines, and they go, oh, it's mostly people who look like me.
Yeah.
So as a teenager, did you have that? Like, was there anything that kind of struck out to you, or you were like, this is different?
No, to be honest, I think because the majority of the time we just stayed on the resort. Gotcha. So, you know, if you have to obviously imagine that majority of the other people on the resort, apart from the staff, of course,
are probably
white, or, you know, they're kind of born and raised in the West as well. Yeah. So it just felt like it. I definitely don't think I would have connected kind of, oh, wow, this is home, you know, kind of my home country, or this is, you know, I don't think I would have even thought of it in that way, to be honest. And I guess even when we did go out for our excursions, it was very much kind of curated for us. So you're kind of protected in the sense you've got a driver that takes you from the doorstep to wherever you're going, and they're leading you. So you don't really get to interact a whole lot with the locals. You do a little bit, you know, if you're wanting to buy something, for example, but it just felt like we were tourists. I wouldn't say that I felt like I was visiting my home country as such.
So then let's flip it then. When you went with your husband, what was that experience like?
Oh, gosh. Okay. So I guess a bit of a backstory. So before we went, I was basically warned not to talk.
Okay.
Not to talk to anyone because, you know, as soon as I open my mouth, they're going to know that you're not from there, and they're going to want to charge you, you know, kind of double, triple, whatever. And you're going to get a completely different experience than maybe you might like. So my husband was actually born and raised in Jamaica.
Okay.
So he wouldn't necessarily get the same treatment that I would.
Course.
Because obviously, you know, and like he said, if you speak to him, he'll say like he used to play a game when he was younger and kind of almost try and guess where people came from by the way they were dressed, by the way they walked. And, you know, you could see it instantly. So there was kind of that pre-warning, don't say anything because they're going to smell you a mile off.
Of course.
So there was that. And I kind of felt it when I was there. So like when we went to like the local markets, for example, I didn't even have to say anything. I think they could still see. And, you know, it was, I mean, I would say they were, you know, they were very respectful. I didn't ever feel like I was being disrespected in any way, but they would try and call out to me, try and get my attention. And so that was very, very different for me. Very, very different.
If your English is very, very different for the British. I get it. It's very different for Americans too, to be honest. Yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah. But it was fine. I think because I was with my husband, at the time, I felt very comfortable because I know he knows Jamaica. And, you know, he knew his way around. He, you know, knew how to barter or to talk with the locals. So that helped me to feel a lot more comfortable. But it was great to be able to just see Jamaica as it is. And I feel like you were talking about that kind of light bulb effect going off. I think that happened the second time round for sure, especially because I was looking around. And I remember I had braids in for this period, and I was looking around and I saw all these, you know, gorgeous melanated people with locks and natural hair. And I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen so many beautiful Black people in one space before. This is like amazing. This is, and I was on my own kind of natural hair journey at the time. And it just made me feel like, I've made the right decision. I'm so glad that I decided to embark on this journey because our people are beautiful and, you know, we have all these natural, beautiful features. And it was so amazing to see them embracing that.
Was there ever a point that you saw yourself living abroad?
I always, maybe not necessarily living abroad, like in my early 20s, but I always loved going abroad. I always knew that travel would continue to be a huge part of my life and something I almost needed. But I didn't really consider moving, I would say, until I met my husband and we went on our first holiday together. And that's when we kind of talked about it, combined with, the fact that, you know, I grew up in London and hating the British weather.
Right. But the notorious British weather. Yes.
Exactly. But because I always schedule, by the time I was kind of hitting my mid-20s, I was away kind of at least a couple of times a year. So I could escape for long enough to bear living in the UK. And look forward to, or, you know, be planning to kind of my next escape. So it was kind of okay at that time. And then I guess I more got into the working world and kind of the monotony of it all. And actually it was like, I'm not really enjoying this so much anymore.
So working is not that great. No.
No, exactly that. And, you know, going away and then thinking, I don't really want to go back.
Wow. Tell me real quick, what was your career? Like, what were you doing?
So youth work for over 10 years. I worked in education for the majority of that time. I worked with a couple of churches as well, but predominantly mentoring in schools especially for like 16 to 19-year-olds, supporting them academically where maybe they were struggling in their academics, and also helping them to make their next step. So thinking about university and career choices. And
oh my gosh, I'm like, are you talking about my life?
Like, oh, really?
I'm literally looking at you and I'm like, and for a decade, I worked in a nonprofit where I worked with what we would call mostly secondary students to prepare them for career and school. And they were mostly, in our case, students of color. And I'm just like, did we do the same job?
Sounds like it.
I feel like we
did.
It. And the funny part is that some people are laughing because they know that right now I also work in higher ed in career and helping. Like I've never gotten away from it. Wow. You did that for 10 years?
I did.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
I loved it. For the most part, I loved it. I loved it. And then, the system and just the way that things work just started to drain me a lot and frustrate me a lot. I would say it was more the system that kind of pushed me out rather than, the young people. I love working with young people. I love the time that I got to spend with them, and I'm still in contact with a number of them now.
Yeah.
So, I loved what I did. I just didn't like the surroundings that I had to do it in.
And I feel like that's the story of many a person that's in a helping profession.
Of course.
It's never the people, and it's never the clients. It's never the kids or the parents.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the system that makes it so hard to do the best that you can to help them do the best they can.
Exactly. Wow. Exactly.
Well, I think that that's a great stopping point, because what I'd like to do after the break is talk about how you and your husband decided to quit jobs and embark on this journey that you're still on, because obviously you're in Mexico. And I want to hear about how you cleared out this debt, because more importantly, there are people who are probably going, I want to be a digital nomad, or I want to live abroad. And just, as you know, money is such a conversation. So
absolutely,
if you guys hold on, we'll be back after the break. All right. So if you are joining us after the break, you basically heard how Chinique and I had the same job for like 10 years. That's the summary of where we ended. And so I want to follow up with that and say, okay, at what point, what was the decision that you and your husband decided to make or went through when you decided that you weren't going to go back to your job? Because I think I kind of want to walk backwards to, why did you decide to upend your life, essentially?
Yeah. So we were on holiday, and it was actually our first holiday that we took together, and we went to Portugal.
Nice.
And like I said to you before, it kind of started to get to a point whenever I went abroad, it was kind of like coming to the end of the holiday, and it was like, oh gosh, got to go back, think about work, all of that stuff. And I think we were having a conversation over our last meal, and we were enjoying this really delicious meal. And, I had an orange juice, and it was like one of the freshest orange juices I've ever had in my life, ever. And I was like, this is glorious. This is absolutely glorious. Why do we have to go back? No, like, why do we have to go? Do we have to go back? Is not going back an option? Like, is that something that we can explore? My husband, like I said, born and raised in Jamaica. So he'll tell you he never fully acclimatized to life in the UK.
That's legit.
Especially with the weather, of course. He said he never really saw himself living permanently in the UK anyway. It was kind of just a bit of a means to an end, and, to kind of get the opportunity to, you know, kind of, especially education wise, but it was never somewhere that he really wanted to settle. So it was like, okay, so maybe let's explore this. Maybe let's see how we can make this a thing. But we were kind of still very early in our relationship, debts, you know, and it was kind of, it just didn't, I just didn't even really know anyone that had moved abroad. It was just, how do we even begin to unpack that? What does that even look like? So we said it, but we didn't actually really do any, and that was like 2011, and we didn't do anything with it until maybe about 4 years later, I think.
Wow.
And then we kind of revisited the conversation then, and then started to actually make some plans. I really started to get fed up with work, and it was like, okay, now I can't, you know, the thought of we're in our, I was almost late 20s by then, and the thought of I have to do this for another potentially 40 years at least. I can't. I'm going to be honest and say, I don't think I can do this for another 40 years. So we gotta find another way.
Right.
we're gonna have to think of something else. I don't know how or what it's gonna look like. And then I guess, you know, YouTube was kind of really starting to boom at that point. And so I was coming across videos of digital nomads, and I remember stumbling across the indefinite honeymoon.
That's a cool name, by the way. Whoever named that's a very cool name.
Exactly. And being like, oh my gosh, babe, they're doing it. Like, they're living abroad, they're traveling the world full time, they're working remotely, they're making it work. It's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah.
So just to actually see, and especially because they were Black as well, so to actually see other melanated people that were living that lifestyle, it kind of made it more real and more possible in that moment. The only thing for me, and it was more me, my husband, he was like, yeah, cool, let's go, let's do it. But in my mind, also, I then got, my clock is ticking. Like I said, I'm kind of approaching my 30s now, I guess, and we've been married a year or two, I think, by now. And I'm thinking, you know we want to have children. They're just a couple, they don't have children. I don't see families doing this. Definitely don't see Black families doing it anyway. Okay, so what do we do now? So do we embark on this potential life-changing adventure, or do we just continue as we are and start our family? And then, you know, babies need stability, babies need to be in one place. So, you know, maybe we're going to have to put this off until baby is old enough to, I don't know. Is there ever a good time? Like when you have children, it just, then when you added the idea of having a family to the mix, it was like, now, okay, it seemed like it was an idea and something we could run with. Oh, but throw this into the mix, and now I can't imagine it again. So, but that was me. You know, AJ was very much like, well, whatever happens, happens. We'll figure it out.
Right.
We'll figure it out. If we have a baby, we'll still go. I don't see why we can't. And I just couldn't get, you know, beyond, the whole idea that babies, you know, what about if there's a health issue? What if, you know, what happens if? So it was me that kind of was putting a halt to kind of things rather than him. And then there was the whole fact that we had almost £20,000 worth of debt kind of hanging over our heads as well. And we had to clear that. And at the time, we had more expenses than we did income. So we were churning out money more than we were bringing it in. And, you know, it was, we've got to clear this, you know, I'm sure we probably could go with the debt in hand, but it just felt like a cloud kind of just hanging over us. And I just wanted, if we were going to do it, I needed to know that that was cleared before we did. And kind of, we had to, if we were going to do this, we're going to have to go hard, because this isn't going to be easy, but I want to make it work.
And I think you touched on things that are very common questions, especially for others who are thinking about kind of what you guys have ended up doing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Number one, I think for anyone, you're right. I think it's not until recently you see a lot more family travelers and a lot more family, and I'm going to say very particularly in the digital nomad space. There have always been children in the expat space. Yeah. And I always have to explain to folks, you know, historically when people became expats, sending agencies, so government, military, missions, right? That's the more traditional, right?
Yeah.
But in the last 10, 15 years, we're seeing more people who are going because they want to go to a location. They're not being sent by an employer. And so I don't think that the digital media had caught up. And I think it still hasn't caught up as much, although it is changing to show what it looks like. I mean, first of all, you hit on it. Black folks in general going anywhere was not even you. I mean, you were not seeing it on anything. I really think it's the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
I've been in this space for a minute, and I can tell you there's been a proliferation because there was really nothing before.
Of course.
But then add on top of that families, right? Yep. Going somewhere. And then add on top of that, possibly being highly mobile and being true digital nomads. And it's just like 0.00001% of content.
Yes. Yeah. And I agree.
So I think that your concerns are completely founded. And honestly, I am sure that there are people listening right now going, same boat. That's me. I don't, how does this work? You know, can you do it? But the thing I'm also interested in is that you mentioned, and this is a lot of people, especially those of us who, you know, we just live in countries where we just accrue debt because it's easier to get, it's easy for us to get debt for a car loan or whatever. Yeah. How did you then decide, like, what are the steps that you took to say, okay, we are going to go abroad. We need to clear this debt. Like, did you take extra jobs? Did you just save more? Did you cut expenses? Did you do all of it? Did you move in with family? What did you do?
Yeah, I was going to say all of it, all of it really. Thankfully, and I think this was able to help us a huge ton. We lived in an area that was kind of on the outskirts of London.
Okay.
So our rent was quite reasonable. I actually managed to find a scheme. Doesn't exist anymore. I literally caught it in the last month that they were going to do it forever.
Yeah.
So I managed to find a scheme where they were offering discounted rent. It was called rent to buy. So the idea was you rent it out for up to 5 years with the idea that one day you would eventually buy the place, and you have up to 5 years to do that. So they offered discounted rent for 5 years. So it meant that what should have been, say, 900, almost £1,000 a month rent ended up being 600.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So exactly. Yeah. So that helped. That first things first, that helped a huge amount. But then, everything, all the above, pretty much. So we definitely saved a lot by reducing our expenses. So all kind of unused subscriptions were completely cancelled. Date night. We used to go out on date nights like religiously every single week. It was like the highlight of our week. Like, Friday night, and we were like, okay, we're gonna have to stop this, you know, because we were spending hundreds of pounds every month on date nights, and it was like, okay, how about we get creative when we keep our date nights at home? Yeah. But we kind of bring date night in the home. Yeah. And at most, we're going to buy a bottle of wine, you know, maybe a takeaway, maybe, and that might only happen once a month. But we're going to go on the cheap, and we're going to just get creative with our date nights. And we're going to try not to go out as much as possible. Even with like our friends and our family, we were like, guys, like, we're on this journey, and so you're not going to see us as much. And if you want to see us, you're going to have to come to us, because we're not going out until basically we can clear this completely. So, you know, we hosted a couple of nights like for our friends and stuff to come over. But apart from that, we didn't go out really unless it was going to work. Yeah, probably that was about it, actually. So yeah, we saved a lot by doing that. Cutting down our grocery expenses as well. I actually discovered using cash envelopes, like a cash envelope system. So outside of anything that could be paid in cash was paid in cash. I would withdraw from the ATM and we would set a budget and I would put that budgeted amount into the cash envelope and that was it for the month. Yeah. So, you know, if there was £200 for the month on groceries and by week 3, there was only £10 left, we were going to have to make it work on those £10. But that was really good because it made sure that we stuck to a budget. You know, we were very, very strict and we, you know, were very lean and we didn't go over at all. So the cash envelope system really, really helped. With our debts, we did a couple of things. So we used what's called the snowball method. Yeah. So we paid the smallest debt first. And it's crazy because I think like the smallest debt was like a £500 credit card that I had. And I'd been spending years trying to pay off this credit card. But when we actually put all of our debts in order and started with the snowball method, and that card was the first one to be paid off, we paid it off in like the first month and it was gone. Yeah. It was completely knocked out. And, you know, I cut up the card immediately and then we were able to move on to the next one. And I know a lot of people don't agree with the snowball method because it means you don't always pay like the highest interest first. But as a motivational tool and just kind of mentally, like for our mental health, it was very, very motivating and actually kind of a bit fun as well to, you know, be able to knock the debts out so quickly. So we did the snowball method. I was able to get a 0% card as well. So I transferred some of our debts onto one card at 0%. And it was 0% for 2 years. So we were able to cut a lot of our interest rates on some of the debts as well. So that was a huge kind of breathing space as well. So that helped a ton as well. And you know, we kind of worked out roughly that, we should be able to pay this off in the 2 years. And because obviously with a 0% card, you want to pay it off before that. Exactly. So we were like, we got 2 years. We got to do it in this time period. But we felt confident that we could. So we did that and transferring everything to the 0% card really helped as well. What else did we do? Saving. So we actually did have like a small amount of savings, you know, just kind of like emergency funds and kind of holiday funds and stuff put aside. But we actually decided, you know, and I know they say you always should have an emergency fund, but we kind of decided that if we had savings in place, but if something was to happen to us, those savings were just going to get swallowed up anyway, and the debt was still going to exist. So maybe it would be better to put a couple of £1,000 just straight onto our debts. And I know it feels a little bit scary not having, you know, any kind of savings at all, but I think we'll work it out. We'll be okay. We'll make it work. And, you know, worst case scenario, we'll, you know, shuffle things around if we have to. So what we did have as savings, again, we just put it all towards the debt and just kind of got that down as fast as possible. The other thing that we did, deciding not to have children straight away as well. So even though, you know, it was like, we could, I'd feel ready to have a child right now. Probably not the best idea. Kids are not cheap.
Not at all.
Not at all. So let's put those plans on hold until we clear this debt. So we make sure that we're in a good financial position to bring life into this world.
I have a follow-up question to that. Did you, your first child, did you have her post being out of debt, or was that still part of the process?
Post being out of debt. It was the timing. Oh gosh, the timing of everything just worked so well. So we were completely debt free by the time she came, which was amazing because it then meant everything was paid in cash, you know, for her. And it was good. We didn't have to use any form of credit. we had the money to completely get everything that we did for her.
Such a good place to be when you don't have to.
Exactly. It felt good. We were in such an amazing place. And especially because obviously by then I'm on maternity leave. So, my income is reducing.
Yeah.
But actually, so kind of going back to how we cleared the debt and kind of worked towards this journey, I also had a side hustle. I had a jewelry and hair accessories business that I had started a few years before. My income on my side hustle was starting to replace my full-time income as well. Wow. So yeah, we worked, that was another one of our methods to trying to clear the debt faster, was trying to increase that income, which we did significantly. So that helped hugely. That helped hugely too.
So at what point you've cleared out the debt, you are pregnant and having your first child. At what point did you revisit the conversation of we want to go back overseas, or we want to go overseas rather?
So I think, yeah, when we started the debt, we had the conversation. When we started clearing the debt, we had the conversation then. And then we were starting to come up on the end of the 5-year agreement for the rent to buy. And I think it was about 1.5 years or just over a year until the 5 years would be up. And so we started to think about a potential date, and it was, okay, we're kind of coming towards the end of this now. What do we do? And, because we had the option to buy now by the end of this 5 years. So do we look at buying, or do we just leave? And we visited, because we actually really enjoyed where we lived, and we looked at, but knowing that we wanted to have children, the place where we were, it was only a 1-bedroom. So we know that we'd outgrow it. We couldn't commit to buying that place because we knew we'd end up outgrowing it very quickly. So that means, okay, we're going to have to look at another place. So we looked at a 2-bedroom, and obviously bearing in mind that we were on a discounted scheme. So then the reality hits that, okay, we're not ready to get a mortgage. And if we're going to rent, now we're going to have to pay market rent. We weren't ready for that. We've been doing 5 years at discounted rent. So to now be expected to pay, and for a 2-bedroom, so now you're saying it's £1,500 per month. And it's like, yeah, we weren't planning for that. Wow. That wasn't in the plans. It just didn't make sense. I mean, we were making enough to do okay. Yeah. But when you more than double the cost of rent, and every year it's getting more and more expensive to live in London, and it felt like I said, we were still being very lean in our living. So we weren't going out very much. We were cutting back on, how much we were seeing our friends and family. And it was like, this isn't really the life that we want to live and that we want to continue to live for the next how many years. Yeah. So we kind of feel like it could be cheaper outside of the UK than living in the UK, just getting by in the UK. It felt like maybe it could actually work out more affordable leaving the UK. Wow. And I remember I had a conversation, again, I was kind of getting really fed up, and I developed anxiety going to work, and I was hating it, really, really hating it. And I remember it was in November, so it must have been November 2016, I want to say, or maybe a little bit earlier than that. But I remember having a conversation with my friend, and I remember I said to her, I don't know how, but I'm done. By next year, I'm leaving my job. I'm just done. I don't have any plans. I don't know how I'm going to finance it. I've got no clue at all. But by this date, and this was, so I set the date of March 2017. And I said, by that date, I'm leaving my job. So yeah, I said that date because I had in my head as well, okay, if I say March 2017 and we have to leave March 2018 because our tenancy will be up by then, that would then give us a whole year to get ready to potentially leave. So yeah, I remember saying to my friend, I don't know how, but I'm quitting my job March 2017, whatever. And so kind of it was in that conversation. It was, okay, March 2018 is the date that we have to leave here, and we're either going to move to somewhere else in London or we're leaving the UK. It's one or the other.
Right.
We're going to make that happen, but we've literally got like a year and a half. That's it. We're doing it.
Were you pregnant at that time?
I didn't know I was.
The big da, 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 da. So you were pregnant. You just didn't know you were.
I didn't know. And so it actually worked. I was like, this is the craziest thing. So when I said to my friend, March 2017, that ended up actually being the date that I took my maternity leave, because I was entitled to. It just worked out. I didn't plan it. Sometimes it makes it sound like I planned to get pregnant to leave, but whether you believe in coincidences or not, or it was divine timing, I don't know, but it just happened to work out that I was able to leave and go on maternity leave in March 2017, which then meant I knew I was always going to take a full year off, and meant that we'd be able to leave March 2018 as planned.
Wow. I think I'm stuck on the full year off maternity. Anyway, that's a whole nother story.
That's another thing there is.
So, okay. So when was your daughter born?
June 2017, so 24th of June.
You've been working towards this plan of leaving. You know you have to leave. Now you have a newborn. What'd you guys decide to do? What was the plan?
So literally March 2017, I went on maternity leave, even though she wasn't born till June, because I was entitled to leave in March. I decided I was going to leave at that point. That was it for us. We said, okay, no, we have a year, because as far as we were concerned, our lease was up in 1 year's time. We weren't going to look anywhere else in London. We have exactly 1 year to get out of here, to Blaxit, basically. So then we still didn't even have an idea of how we were going to earn our income. We had rough ideas from, from what we'd been researching on YouTube, and we kind of thought, because my husband had always been interested in IT, that's his background. He has a degree in computing. So we thought he'd done little bits of like creating websites for people prior to this. Like his first client was my mom, and he built her website. So we thought that could be one of our incomes. We knew about teaching online. Like I said, I had a side hustle. So I was creating my jewelry and we were selling online. And like I said, we were able to make a full-time income out of that. And part of the way we did that is because my husband did a lot of work behind the scenes, getting our SEO up and making sure that we were being found. So we were like, we know how to make money online. We know how to do this, but obviously we had a physical product that we were doing it. We know that we just need to turn this into a digital product. So we knew there were options. We knew there were different ways that we were going to make it work, but we kind of just had it in our heads at that time. We hadn't actually turned it really into anything. We were still just focused on saving as much money as possible. So obviously by now the debt's cleared, and now it's, we need to save. We need to save as much money as possible. But business was great. I had my daughter and it was one of the best months. The month I gave birth was one of our best months financially. And so they kind of almost, even though we knew, kind of time was ticking, we didn't even really have time to plan, because everything was just kind of moving, with having a newborn, having the business, things were just going so quickly that we didn't even really, I would say probably it wasn't until about October or November of that year that we really started to plan and look at kind of where was going to be our first destination. Because we had differences as, to where that would be even.
So where did you guys ultimately decide you wanted to go to first?
So we ended up going to Spain first. I wanted to go to Thailand, but my husband said he wanted to go to Spain and we settled on that because he has a brother. One of his brothers lives in Spain. And so I guess the idea was Spain is close enough to London that if it all went horribly wrong, it wouldn't cost us very much to come back. Exactly. We could come back. Or, you know, we had his brother and his family that we could go and see or connect with. If we needed any help with anything, whereas Thailand just felt very far away and very, very foreign. Whereas Spain, you know, we've been around Europe before. It feels more familiar and more comfortable, I guess. So that's why we settled on Spain in the end.
How long were you in Spain for?
For 4 months.
Let's just be honest. The story up until this point is actually kind of wild and interesting, right? Because everything has worked out. You have a baby in the middle of this.
Yeah.
You leave and go to Spain. You go to Spain, and Spain is lovely. I've been to Spain, so there's nothing against Spain. And you're there for 4 months. And in that 4-month time, and I'm always curious about this with people who are really nomadic. Were you thinking to yourself, okay, this is our starting point, but there are other places we'd like to explore?
Yeah, 100%. I think we always actually, because before this, back in 2015, we did a Black History Studies course together. And so we did think about the idea of moving to an African country, you know, thinking about connecting with, even though we're both of Jamaican heritage, you know, thinking going back to the motherland, and maybe that's where we're supposed to be eventually. So I think we kind of thought about maybe doing this world tour and then ending up in the motherland eventually. I think that's the idea that we had in our minds.
Yeah.
So we were like, we kind of planned out the first year roughly and said, well, let's travel a little bit around Europe.
Yeah.
And then we'll see after that. We just didn't really plan it out too much, but we had an idea that we'd start in Spain, maybe, then Greece. And we were looking at doing some workaways. So we did actually line up a couple of workaway opportunities, and they were centered around Europe. Yeah. So that was where we were going to spend our first year. And they didn't kind of go to plan. Yeah. So we kind of had to pivot a bit.
Oh my gosh. And you're doing this and you've got a baby in tow, correct?
Yeah.
And which eventually would become a toddler in tow, I would imagine.
Very quickly, yes.
Right. I'm in the back. I was just home with my 4-year-old niece and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, they did this with an infant and then a toddler and then probably a preschooler. And so you're just kind of going around. And for those who don't know, you know, workaways, I'm familiar, but essentially you work in conjunction for a place to stay.
That's right.
And maybe or maybe not, there's a stipend, but I had been to Italy and had heard and seen people were doing it. Sometimes Americans are not as familiar with that, but people from other places in the world, especially Europeans and Oceania folks. So, oh my gosh. So it seems like you had a general idea of where you wanted to go, but you just it seems like you kind of went with the flow. Like you knew you wanted to be somewhere. And I noticed that all the places you've gone to have been warm places. So that was in the back of your mind. And
exactly.
And so how long on average were you staying in a place?
1 to 3 months on average.
Wow.
On average. Yeah. About, like I said, we were in Spain for 4 months, but we pivoted because we weren't really happy with our workaway. So we ended up leaving that early. Okay. And after that, then we decided, okay, we thought we were going to continue to work away for a while. And that really put our first experience actually really put us off. So we were like, okay, we got to switch and think of this slightly different. And so we kind of decided not to commit too long to a country and decided to kind of do a month or so at a time, depending, you know, and it was a number of things depending on how much it was costing us, depending on how long the tourist visa would allow us to stay in said country. And kind of as time grew on, we kind of tend to elongate the time to maximize that tourist visa. But on average, it was about a month to 3 months. Yeah.
And at any point, because you talked about, obviously you had a business and then your husband's skills and kind of you guys already doing things online. Did you at any point sort of transition out of from more workaway work to like just your own content creation and your own we're saying side hustles, but it's your business now. If you no longer have a 9 to 5, did you make that transition?
Yeah, we did. So we started to explore it. We decided when we first landed in Spain, we said we were going to, give ourselves a whole month to just enjoy and, not think about making money at all. So we did that. And then, so it was after that month was up, actually, my husband did a TEFL, an intense TEFL qualification, an immersion course. So he was actually going there, and it was in Spain. So it was face to face. So he was going to the course full time. And so that meant that I had Taji full time. So there wasn't really any time after that to really think about it. So that was that was our second month was kind of taken up. And then I would say kind of by about the third or fourth month, we started to think more about, okay, financially, AJ had finished the TEFL, so he was starting to look for opportunities at that point. And I was starting to, we'd already started documenting our journey on social media. And I was starting to look at different ways that we could monetize that. And I was doing little bits here and there, but with a very demanding baby at the time, it was a little bit challenging to kind of balance the two of those. So it was just kind of little bits. And I would say it wasn't till maybe the end of that year that we started to find a bit of a flow with it all. So we were kind of living on most of our savings up until that point.
Oh my gosh. I forgot who I had on, but we were talking about, online content creation. And I love, like, if you've never done it and you're looking on the outside in, it looks like it's the easiest.
Exactly.
It looks like it's so easy. Like, you're laughing because you've done it, right? It looks like it's so especially when you follow people who have what seems like a lot of followers, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, just especially people don't know. They're like, yeah, just do this and then you can go viral, whatever. And you're looking at them going, first of all, it's hella hard to go viral. Second of all, no one ever knows why anybody goes viral. And thirdly, the number of followers have nothing to do with how much money you can actually make.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Because I'm sure you know this. I know people who are micro influencers, and I'm using influencers just as an example, who they don't have a lot of followers, but they actually make a lot of money based on what they do. And because the content that they create for their small audience, their 50 member audience is going to pay for it versus someone who's got 100,000 people and 10 people are going to pay for it. And so I was like, look, I know people who make money online, and it's not, don't ignore the social media numbers, because it's not, this is not an indication, but also the commitment is, and that's why I'm like looking at you, because I'm like, with a child, the commitment to making it. I mean, I do it daily and I'm ready to go to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, I 100%. But I'm the same as well. I say to people, because, people ask me about content creation and they get a bit scared and say, but I don't have a following. I don't have anyone really following what I'm doing. But I always say, actually, I was monetizing our social media at 100 followers.
Yeah.
And like, going back to exactly what you said, you see people with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and they're not making any money. And I'm like, which was a great encouragement, because I think that's actually what helped me to keep going, because it was like, oh, actually, we can do this. But I think, there's something about micro, and I think we're seeing it more in this day and age now as well, where, when you're kind of a micro influencer, people trust you more because they know you're doing it because you genuinely mean what you say. You're more likely to be authentic. Like, I don't personally at the moment, I'm not saying I'm not open to it, but I don't do any sponsorships. So, I never do anything just for the money. Because everything that I share online, I share because I have personally experienced it or I've used it. So they know that they can trust what I've said. And I do think that helps 100%.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, you've hit it on the nose, because I think showing up and being consistent, right? Because even anybody that any of us follow, podcast, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, part of it is because they're consistent.
Yep.
And I would say what can be hard, especially, as people are listening to your story and they're thinking, okay, how can I do some of the same things? Is that you guys you were consistent. Like even getting out of debt, you were very consistent and you had a plan. It's the same thing, I think, if you're going to be a digital nomad. And Christine, who I mentioned, who was in Barcelona, I mentioned off air, who is totally full on entrepreneur. We talk about this all the time. It's like showing up when they're 10 people will lead to having 1,000 people and will lead to other things. But it is hard. I will be the first one to admit, like, and I've been in a minute, so I'm not at that stage anymore, but it is hard to put content that you spent way too much time on, especially because you didn't know the you spent way too much time on the design, the tech, the edit, whatever it is, right? And then it looks like nobody's read it or listened to it or watched it or heard it.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
your face is just like, yes, oh my God. That's why I don't take anybody for granted, especially with this podcast. Cause look, I know what it's like where you're just like, yeah, I don't think anyone cares. So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about that with what your family's doing. What are the spaces as far as your brand, social media? Where are you inhabiting? Like, what are the things that you're doing and what can people see when they follow you?
A number of things. So we very much we generally tend to preach multiple streams of income, because I genuinely believe that one income is too close to none.
Right. You're right. You're not wrong.
And at any moment, that one income could be taken away from you. And I think a lot of people will say they've experienced that over the last couple of years in particular. Yeah. So, and when we started our journey and my husband started teaching English online, one of the things that we quickly discovered that when you work with these online teaching companies, the majority of the time they're Chinese teaching companies, they don't abide by the same laws that we might be used to when you think about like unfair dismissal and, kind of those things. They don't abide by the same laws that we would generally expect. And so a job could be taken away at a moment's notice. And that did happen. Yep. That did happen, and we experienced that. And so because of those experiences, it was like, okay, we're not going to have just one or two sources of income because those could be taken away. We're going to aim for as many different income streams as possible. And it kind of actually does go kind of in hand with how we are as people, because we tend to feel like we're multifaceted and we're never just thinking about one thing, or we're always getting ideas about how to do something else anyway. So we kind of like the idea of having lots of different fingers in different pies. So when you come to Pro Family Travels, you'll hear me talking about teaching English online, because we both did it. My husband started teaching English, but I teach English as well. You'll hear us talking about web design and hosting, which is what my husband now does full time. You'll hear me talk a lot about digital downloads. I sell digital downloads online, but you'll hear me talking about being a virtual assistant as well. I'll talk about market research and surveys. And I just love finding different ways to make money online. So I would say that I can't really say that there's one thing in particular that I do, because I like to try different things and just see what's out there and what's possible. And I think it goes back to when we were clearing our debts. And I just believed that my husband says, there's a saying in Jamaica, it's every nickel makes a muckle. Like every single penny counts. So if I could do a survey, and like I do survey studies, I don't do them as much anymore, but I was doing survey studies and making like £300-400 a month. That's a significant amount of income. But when you break it down, one might only pay £20 for an hour, and so sometimes people are like, oh, but it only pays £20. But it's like, yeah, but I'm doing like 20 of these a month.
Right.
And so it adds up, and that's a significant, that could be a month's rent for us somewhere. And that's just by doing surveys or just by doing market research and talking to people and giving them feedback on a new product that they want to release. So yeah, I love just finding different ways to make money online.
And I was going to say, it may not seem like a lot, like, for example, doing their surveys, but if you're making let's say you make £300, you can invest that money. And it makes more.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And so, no, I love that. I mean, here's the core of what you said, and I want people to take away from this, is that there are different avenues and different streams that you need to look at to generate, because you shouldn't just go with one idea. Because let's be honest, even if you stayed in London, you could lose your job. Okay. Yeah, exactly. It's the same concept. It's just that you are more honest and more recognizing it because you are a digital nomad. But like, do you know what I mean? Because it's just like people are like, what if you run out of money? I mean, you can run out of money. You ain't got no money right now living where you are.
Exactly.
It's just a matter of you cut your expenses and live somewhere warmer and don't have the stress.
And I genuinely think cheaper. Like, I always think about, when people talk about wealth and what wealth really is, and people often put it down to how much money you make, kind of your job title, and how much money you make determines your success. But, I think about it more as, say, how much money I can keep.
Right.
So even if I am earning less, and I think sometimes, especially as digital nomads, I think digital nomads typically tend to earn less than maybe someone who lives in their home country. Yeah. But if my current expenses are only £1,000 a month, which often they have been in many of the countries that we've lived in, if my expenses are £1,000 a month, and we only ever bring in, say, £2,000 a month between us, we're saving £1,000 every single month. I'm sorry, it might not sound like very much. £24,000 a year may not sound like very much, but if I'm able to save £1,000 a month compared to you living in the home country and you're still in debt, or, you're paying out £3,000 a month and you're not able to keep much of it, who's really worse off?
Yeah.
You've just listened to an episode of The Global Chatter, which is hosted by me, Amanda Bates. It is edited by Stephanie Ficcio. Don't forget to subscribe to The Global Chatter on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Global Chatter, or stop by Twitter and find us at Global Chat Pod. If you have a question, want to subscribe to the newsletter, or are interested in sponsoring, visit theglobalchatter.com.